Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lecture 8 in our series on the Trivium. That is the first three of the classical liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, and logic. We're moving further today in our discussion of the logic of terms, and we'll be focusing on definitions. What does it mean to define something, and what kind of definitions are there? Let's take a look. To define something, I mean, we've gotten accustomed, of course, in the last several centuries to the dictionary. Samuel Johnson famously composed a dictionary of the English language, and today the Oxford English Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, even Google provides us with various definitions of terms. These definitions are often objects of debate, right? How should something be defined? How should the world be, as it were, carved up into various things, various, Aristotle would say substances, but we can at least just say things in the world. What makes something what it is? These are all the kinds of questions that we'll look at today. So what is a definition? A definition is designed to sum up, this is Hauser, our author from Logic as a Liberal Art. Definitions are designed to sum up in a convenient and short verbal formula the essence of what it is we are defining. Now, that's a very Aristotelian definition, that we are actually looking for the essence of the thing. An alternative approach might be to say we're going to define things according to how a term is used. And certainly those are two competing poles in the effort to craft useful definitions of things as we find in dictionaries. The word definition itself comes from the Latin, the prefix de, meaning completely, and finire, meaning to bound or limit. And this itself, the verb coming from the word finis, meaning boundary or end, the finish line. It's probably the best way to do this. What you're really doing is you are outlining the boundaries of a thing. And we do this all the time, whether we should or not, in the case of property, right? What are the boundaries of your property? I'm going to define what is included, say, in the purchase of a house or whatever the case may be. We want to define the boundaries. Importantly, Hauser points out, and as I mentioned in the last lecture, I think this is something that has important ethical implications. There are no definitions of individuals in their individuality. So you can certainly say what a thing is, even a person, an object, whatever. You can say certain objective things about that person or thing, but you cannot define them in their singularity, in their individuality. Who they are, that is, cannot be defined with finality, even if certain features about what they are, their height, their weight, whatever the case may be, can be defined. So I want to make some definitions. I want to look around the world and figure out what's there. How do I do this? Well, I start by trying to understand the extension of a term. This is something that we met a while back, the distinction between extension and comprehension, right? So comprehension has to do with what a term means, what is the thing. Extension just has to do with how far does it go, right? How many objects in the world answer to this definition or can reasonably be included within it. It is useful for this reason to start with examples. So if I want to, for example, figure out what is an apple, right? I might have at a supermarket 10 different kinds of apples, and I can look at all of those things and say, okay, all of these are apples. These are examples of apple. Then I can look for, Aristotle would say, essential predicables, right? Common features of those things called apples, and try to understand what makes them an apple, right? I can distinguish also apples from oranges or from bananas or from any other thing in the grocery store. By having a definition of apple, I'm able to do that in advance, or I'm able to form a definition of apple by making those observations. An accurate definition, Hauser offers, will have the same extension as the thing being defined. So the definiens here is the term for the definition that we craft, create, or articulate, and the definiendum is the thing being defined. And the goal is for the definition to match the thing being defined, such that we can have an accurate understanding of of the world. And practically speaking, I mean, if I'm trying to build a bridge, right, and I want to use a certain material to build that bridge that will react appropriately with the natural conditions in that place such that the bridge will not fall over, I want to know the properties of that thing. I want to have an accurate definition, first of all, of those natural conditions and of the material that I'm using, so that I can accurately determine whether that bridge will withstand the pressure that will be on it and will not fall over. So, outside of questions of identity or more subjective questions, there are ways in which this understanding of the world applies very directly to practical contexts such as that. So I've helped myself to this image created by one of the wonderful denizens of the online world, and thank you to whomever created this image. And I'm proposing here that understanding is all about knowing how to make distinctions. How to make distinctions. I am a person who from time to time drinks wine. I am also a person who knows very little about wine and has known very little about wine for all of his life. I know that I like red wine. I know that I generally like dry red wine. And that's kind of it. So when I walk into a shop, I mean, I don't know, I've heard anecdotally that Spanish wine is good, or, sometimes I like Riesling because I had an experience drinking Riesling 20 years ago, or whatever the case may be. My ability to make distinctions in a wine shop is pretty limited, right? I just bounce around among what I happen to know and associations I happen to have formed based on my personal experience. The people who work in that wine shop, however, in principle, and certainly more than me, know what is in that wine shop. They are able to make distinctions, for example, like those made on this chart, right? You are able to distinguish between a Malbec and a Merlot, right? Or a Cab and a Chianti, and be able to explain why they are different in the way they are. To appreciate something, to appreciate in this case wine, is to be able to make those distinctions. To understand wine is to be able to make those distinctions. This applies also in the case of something like classical music, or music in any genre at all. Right? Let's say I'm listening to a genre of music that I don't usually listen to. Maybe I'm not able to appreciate, how this particular song is different from other songs in that genre. I'm not able, therefore, to see what makes this song special or what makes this song excellent according to the standards of that genre. For me, to buy a bottle of wine that costs more than $10 or $12 doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because I don't have the understanding to really appreciate what I would be experiencing. If I were to know more about it, however, and to be able to make those distinctions, then that I would be able to more fully appreciate the excellences that are possible within this domain. So thank you for listening to my spiel there, but I really think this is a helpful way to approach the question of definitions. This is about making distinctions that improve our ability to appreciate what excellence means in a given domain. There are lots of different kinds of definitions, or according to Aristotle, there are precisely three main kinds, and under the second, there are three subtypes. So we're just going to take a look at these briefly, following the presentation again in our book, Hauser's Logic as a Liberal Art. The three main types are nominal definitions, real definitions, and stipulative definitions. And under real, we have several subcategories. Let's take a look at each of these. Starting with nominal and real definitions, this is going to be the main distinction. Stipulative is kind of on its own at the end. A nominal definition, term nominal, comes from the Latin word nomen, meaning simply name. And this gives us some preliminary understanding of something we need to investigate that kind of thing, even if we aren't yet sure it exists. Let's find some other language for that. So the first example here is knowing the source of a word. So for example, where I say here, this is from the Latin word nomen, or when I said before that the word definition is from this Latin combination of the prefix "d" with the verb finire, right? Like, Interesting. Nice to know. Tells you something about it. Certainly, you can draw some conclusions from that. You can deepen your understanding a bit, but it doesn't tell you really what it is. It's just talking about the word that we use for it, right? Or some more superficial kind of feature of it. It could also be a general description, like term is a concept in logic. That is true. It doesn't tell you much about it. I couldn't really pinpoint what a term is just based on that sentence. Term is a concept in logic, but you can still get some kind of purchase that way. Or the same thing here in the case of giving a synonym. A definition is an explanation, or we might say a kind of explanation. It's like, yeah, that's a bit helpful. It moves me in the right direction, but it doesn't really yet tell me what it is. It doesn't define the boundaries. You get toward that in the case of real definitions, by contrast. The real definitions here focus on the reality, and that's from the Latin term res, or thing, of the thing being defined. So we get our term, for example, republic, from the Latin word res publica, the public thing, right? So anything that is being defined, you want to actually know about that, not just know about the term or know broadly where it falls. You want to know what the definition of that thing is. There are three kinds of real definitions, and we'll start with logical definitions. These are, as we have on the slide here, developed using the technique of division that we've covered in earlier installments in this series. Hauser writes the following: we define the species of a thing by identifying the genus or genera, which is the plural of genus, under which the species fits, and then adding the difference that distinguishes this species from other species falling under that same genus. So we call this the specific difference. A couple of examples. We'll start with that. For example, a human being, by Aristotle and others, is called a rational animal. So you have here rational, which is the difference that marks out a member of the human species from the larger genus animal, because we are animals, period, right? However, the observation has long been that there is something referred to as rationality that distinguishes human animals from other animal species. This is, Hauser writes, the ideal kind of definition, but it's really hard to achieve because you got to have kind of a picture of the whole field of various species under that genus, various other genera in relation to that genus. You have to really be able to locate it precisely. This is what we can do, for example, when discovering a new species in the context of biology, because we have a very well-developed system of genus and species and kingdom, phylum, class, all the rest of it, in which to locate a new species. Same thing perhaps with stars in the context of astronomy or other celestial phenomena. A second kind of real definition is a causal definition. And Hauser gives us this. These causal definitions identify the essence of the species defined not directly, but by identifying one or more of its causes. So this is, what company produced a thing, right? That is an Apple product, right? It was made by Apple. Apple was the efficient cause of that product. In this case, we ask where something came from. Hauser gives us the example: a human being is a composite of body and soul, and that pertains to the material cause or the formal cause of a human being, body and soul. In this case, the body is the material cause, right, and the soul is the formal cause. So when you identify, according to Aristotle's four causes, see the last lecture, various causes of a thing, you're able to understand that thing and thus be able to draw some kind of boundaries around it so you can pick it out when you see it in the world. And the last example here of a real definition, so remember these are the three subcategories of real definitions for Aristotle, is a descriptive definition. And these, Hauser writes, define the species of a thing by using one of its necessary properties. So in this case, I don't know essentially what the thing is, maybe I don't even know what caused it, but I can describe it according to the properties that I can visibly see it manifesting, and thus achieve some kind of limit and understanding where it extends in the world. So here we focus on effects. What properties or accidents does the thing exhibit because of what it essentially is? And that would especially be properties. So, for example, a human being is a worrying animal. Example from Hauser. This, across the history of thought, human beings have been the laughing animal, the political animal, a rational animal, in this case, worrying animal. Worrying here entails the ability to worry, which is a property of human beings. It is possible for us to worry about something. But it also entails the act of worrying, which is an action built upon this property. And we would use this in the terms presented in the last lecture, a predicable accident, right? So I have the ability to worry. That is a property of me as a human being, and I can begin to define what a human being is in, sure, a fairly limited way, but by saying human beings are animals that have the ability to worry. Right? I can also observe that, as it so happens, at this moment, I am worrying, right? I am engaged in the act of worrying. That is something I can predicate of myself at present, perhaps. I'm not sure. Maybe, am I worrying about anything at present? But it would be accidental because I am worrying about something in this moment, that as I am realizing my potential to worry or actualizing my potential. But in the next moment, maybe I'm not actualizing that potential. I'm still me, right? However, my accidents are different. So in this case, neither, Hauser reminds us, this property or this accident, worrying, are essential to being human. We cannot worry and still be human, but we can observe these properties and begin to describe what we see in a thing as a way of coming up with some kind of definition. So of these three definition, well, let's talk about stipulative first, and then we'll go back to the main chart. So the last kind, we've talked about nominal definitions, which just kind of give us some initial purchase on a thing. We've talked about three different kinds of real definitions that in different ways do precisely identify what a thing is. And our last kind is stipulative definitions. And a stipulative definition is laid down or simply assumed without explanation or defense. So if I'm writing a paper, I might say, for the purpose of this essay, X will be defined as this. Right? That's what it is. Now, a person reading that essay might say, well, I disagree with that. Well, in that case, you have to address the author's stipulated definition. Maybe the whole argument of the paper falls apart, right? If they stipulate a definition that is reasonably not appropriate for that thing. There are at least three kinds of stipulated definitions, according to Aristotle. First, definitions asserted as a way of getting into a subject. We do this in geometry. So I will say that a circle is defined as a figure where all points are equidistant from a center point, right? Or a triangle is a three-sided figure whose degrees add up to, is it 180? My goodness, I certainly hope I'm getting that right. I was never very strong in math. Anyway, we define circles and triangles in that way. We've never seen an ideal, pure, in itself circle or triangle, right? We can conceive of those things in some measure mentally based on the definitions we have of them, but we've never observed those things in nature. Any real existing circle or triangle will only approximate the idea that we have of a circle or triangle. And so we simply assert that this is what we will mean by the word circle. And you could deny that and say, no, I don't think that's what circle should mean, but then you would just be playing a different kind of language game than modern geometry or Euclidean geometry in this case. You can also have definitions that are arbitrary. And this is kind of what I've mentioned when you say for the sake of argument, right? So let's say that this is the case for the sake of argument. There you're kind of bracketing the question of whether that is true. You're saying, okay, I'm not going to deal with this here, but assuming this is true, this is what would follow. Boom, 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 boom. So maybe this is like building an argument where you bracket, you say, I'm not going to demonstrate that all of these premises are true. I'm just going to take for the sake of argument that this is true, right? The last kind definitions stated as preliminary opinions or hypotheses, subject to further refinement. So here you might say, yeah, I'll take this for the sake of argument, but I'm not asserting that this is necessarily true. I'm just saying this is going to be a tool in what follows. So I'm going to start from this and then maybe later come back and revisit that. So, three main kinds of definitions with subcategories under the second one. Nominal definitions just kind of send us in the right direction. Real definitions tell us about the actual nature of the thing in varying degrees. And stipulative definitions are used in the case of an argument and without actually working out all the reasons for it. Of the three real definitions here, they're presented on this slide in decreasing order of precision. So, a logical definition like vulpes vulpes as the scientific name for the red fox. We had that as an example in the last lecture. That's the most precise kind of definition you can have. A causal definition, where you're observing the properties of the thing, is also pretty good, but not as good as a logical one. And a descriptive definition is the least kind of reliable of the three, but maybe that's all that's available to us in a given case, and it can still get us some distance toward the thing. Here's a last slide on rules for good definitions. These are provided by our author, Hauser. 4 rules. Number 1, a definition should have the same extension as the term defined. Right? So if my definition of apple is it is a fruit, right? Okay, that's kind of a nominal definition. It's true, but I'm not going to be able to pick out an apple from a group of apples, pears, bananas and oranges if I need to. So that would not be a very good definition of apple, to simply say it's a fruit. Rule number 2, a definition should express the essence of the thing defined. If I say that a definition of the apple is that it's in a grocery store, right? Well, that's an accidental feature of an apple, potentially, but it doesn't help me really to pick out what an apple is. It's not getting at that question of what the apple is. It's just telling me where to find it. Third, the definition should be more clear than the thing defined. I mean, I encounter an apple, I see it, I see the real individual thing. It's beautiful, I love it, I like apples. But the definition is going to give me more information, more clarity about what that thing is that I'm seeing. And rule number 4, the definition should have the same meaning, we call this comprehension, as the thing defined. So a good definition, and again, it's we human beings who are crafting these definitions, these short verbal formulas to help us pick out things in the world, that should mean the same thing as the thing I am defining. Not only should its extension be correct, but its comprehension as well. Perhaps more than we thought possible to say about definitions. Well, very interesting field, and a very fraught field as well, because determining how we as a human community will define something has real consequences in the world. And so understanding the various kinds of definitions on offer and what makes a good definition, I submit that this is a useful skill. We will pick this up again in our next installment. Thank you very much.